Welcome to PetrolPlaza Talks. Today we're going to be talking to Paula Thomas from Let's Talk Royalty, a world expert on anything to do with loyalty. Her podcast, that you can find on Spotify as well as other platforms, is an industry podcast for loyalty marketing professionals. For our upcoming special on PetrolPlaza about loyalty and customer engagement, we thought this would be a great time to sit down with somebody like Paula and discuss some of the trends in loyalty for C-stores and fuel retail, as well as some of the examples that we see around the world. Paula, it's great to have you here.
Great to be with you, Oscar. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. So we can start with a pretty general question. And, Paula, you look at loyalty from all kinds of perspectives. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of some of the details, when you look at fuel retailers, what do you think they do wrong and what do you think they get right compared to some other industries?
Yes. It's a difficult to compare across industries, I suppose, in some ways, Oscar, because I think we all know that probably fuel is the most challenged, for example, in terms of having margins available to recognize and reward consumers. So for me, it's one thing to say that there's wonderful propositions and concepts and things being done maybe in coffee loyalty, but it's a very different business to fuel. So I think what fuel does well is I think, got an awful lot of respect, actually, Oscar. And I think that has come through even more so through the pandemic. I think what we've all realized is that consumer behavior is changing. There's probably fewer customers. There certainly were a lot fewer customers, as we all know, when people were working from home, for example. So I think the fuel industry, the people I've interviewed, for example, with my show, really have a very detailed understanding of the power of loyalty programs and the need to invest in them, the need to sometimes bring in external expertise, Oscar, because I often feel that loyalty in other industries doesn't always, bring in the right people to build their propositions for them. But I've seen that certainly in the fuel industry, there's great expertise, there's investment, and I also think there's a very good understanding of the geographical differences because, I think we can say, yes, everybody's a consumer, everybody's buying fuel, but actually the landscape is very different no matter where you go. So I've been very impressed with what I've heard coming through in terms of localizing propositions within certainly fuel, retail and loyalty.
Mhm. We must say that you've actually worked for the C-store and fuel retail industry for a number of years through liquid barcodes. So
Yes.
you're definitely quite the expert on this field. And I've seen
Mm,
on your podcast you've interviewed the Shells and the BPs of this world. What
yeah.
when you look at the current scope, what do you see as kind of like the biggest innovations or trends in the loyalty space?
Yeah, I think from a general perspective, Oscar, as you said, first of all, I have spent 3 years working with the guys in Liquid Barcodes. I'm now purely a podcaster, but still pay close attention to the industry. So I would say from a global perspective in all industries, and it's probably one of the softer shifts, but I feel it's important to mention. And that's really where there's an increasing mindset of the importance of loyalty, that customers are your only source of revenue, and that it's really important to actually be obsessed with delighting them. So, for example, I interviewed Fred Reichheld on the show recently. His name might not be familiar to you, but his work is. So, Fred Reichheld created the Net Promoter Score framework. And he just released a new book after 11 years. And it was all about, really obsessing about delighting your customers. So I think it's important from a global perspective to really take it that seriously. So that's a really good, I suppose, trend in general. And I think what has happened is there's also a realization that you can't just build a proposition, expect customers to buy into it straight away, for example, and start behaving in a more profitable way. I think there is very much a trend, and we've seen it in a lot of the research coming through, is that you have to demonstrate loyalty to your customers. So it's almost flipping the expectations between who has to be loyal to who. So that's another very important distinction I think that's coming through. Again, it's very general. And I think then there's some interesting stuff happening, I suppose, on the more kind of practical side. So we've talked before about subscription. That's probably the biggest topic we need to discuss. But before I even touch on that one, I also feel it's important to notice things like Shell in the UK, for example, have removed having points as a currency. And I found that very interesting because points are a very useful framework. They're a useful mechanic. They are probably the best understood in terms of loyalty proposition. But of course, sometimes they're considered, not rewarding enough. So there can be a certain level of complacency when you launch something with points. So I think the UK have certainly decided, as I said, Shell Go Plus a number of years ago, decided to go for a non-points based program. So that's a big industry trend as well. There's lots of other models of loyalty you can look at. So yeah, so that's that one. And of course, subscription, I guess, is the big one we should talk about.
Yeah, I remember that you already mentioned subscription last year, and obviously we hear more and more about it. I guess in our industry, we first saw it coming through the car wash sector,
Yeah,
which made a lot of sense for their businesses, and we see it in the US. It's become very mainstream now.
yeah.
And then from the coffee side, we saw the Starbucks of this world. We saw
Mm.
Pret a Manger. Now we've seen 7-Eleven and actually one of the first convenience retailers to do it. So
Mm.
do you expect this just to move forward rapidly and to move from category to category?
I do absolutely. I think, Oscar, there's benefits on both sides. I feel like we all, I suppose, know about the subscription business model for many years. We've probably all subscribed to magazines or Netflix or Amazon Prime, for example. But in my experience, if you're not already doing something with subscription, then I think at least you should be evaluating it. There's just so many possible ways of implementing it. And obviously, for a retailer, there are the benefits of, recurring revenue. It is a really nice way to stabilize the revenue stream. And you mentioned car wash, for example. I've just interviewed Circle K in the US, the category director there, Lars Hecht, and he gave me some wonderful insights, Oscar, in terms of how powerful it is proving for Circle K globally, but also, I suppose, to balance it. So, for example, with Circle K, they're not expecting 100% of their revenue ever to come through this one new model, for example. So, what Circle K are aiming for is perhaps 50% of the revenue to come through that channel. And then, of course, you still have the typical traditional customers. So I definitely expect it to continue. I expect it to grow across categories. And I think what customers like is, I think, just the simplicity of it. And I was quoting, for example, myself, Oscar. I just, subscribed to, a business here in Dubai where I live. And all of a sudden now, it's almost gamified my experience with that brand because I can give myself a target to say, okay, once I get past this threshold, now I'm beating the system. So I feel like I'm getting better value. So I really do think, particularly in uncertain times, and clearly the past 2 or 3 years has been the most uncertain we could ever have imagined. So I think subscription gives us a lot of certainty and reliability. So customers really do like it as long as you get the proposition right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's true that the customer believes they can beat the system by
Yeah.
trying, which only falls into the hands of the company. As I was telling you, I was in a recent event these days in the Middle East at Refuel MENA, and there was a panel where they were talking about these topics,
Mm,
and some of the leading Middle Eastern retailers were there, and they were saying, why not fuel? It could also be part of the subscription program. So
yeah.
especially, I think this gets really interesting when brands start having a lot of EV chargers in the networks, and
Mm,
because of the business model, it's quite interesting that it would probably work as a subscription. So do you think
mm.
we'll see this move forward with electrification and even with fuel?
I think it's entirely possible, Oscar. Yes, I mean, both trends are unstoppable. So it's inevitable that somebody will find a way of making it work for both. I do think there are some examples in the US. I believe Seven Rewards have been experimenting with a subscription where, you get cents off, for example. So, obviously the proposition has to fit the category. So I know there is experimentation already happening. I haven't seen it in the electric vehicles as yet myself, but definitely want to watch. And I do believe there will be more and more happening in the subscription space, regardless of what we do. It's definitely something that's just growing and growing all the time.
Hmm. In an article that you published on PetrolPlaza, you said that this was from 2 years ago, but I guess it still stands, or even more so. That you said sustainability is a key part of how what customers look
Mm,
to have loyalty to a brand, and
mm,
we see that especially with the Jet Set generation and the Jogger generations.
yeah.
Do you feel like the brands that we have, the big brands, the Shells, the BPs, the Circle Ks, they have a battle to win to get that kind of that fidelity from the young customer? And what can they do to improve loyalty from these younger generations?
Well, the younger generation is always a challenge, Oscar, I would say, for the whole loyalty industry, predominantly because, I suppose when we're younger, we have less spending power. So loyalty programs have the best value, of course, when you're spending on things like flights or, other bigger items of spend, regular grocery, for example. So I think the whole industry is looking for ways to connect with them, whether it's millennials or Gen Z and all of the various different segments that we talk about. But what we have heard, and I suppose it does predate the pandemic, but it hasn't gone away. I think during the pandemic, the attention focused, of course, to more survival mode for lots of loyalty programs and businesses, specifically, as we already talked about in terms of fuel. But absolutely, the need for a sustainable proposition is something that is being, I would say, demanded by an increasing number of people across all demographics. There's definitely no easy answer, Oscar. I wish I could sit here and tell you that there is an answer that all of the big fuel companies could buy into. What I'm hearing from them is that they are all looking very hard and doing their absolute best. They're making big promises to reduce obviously carbon emissions and carbon offsetting programs. And we've seen lots of potential partners and solutions being developed for them. Certainly within, again, the broader industry, we have dedicated awards, for example, to recognize eco-loyalty. So there's definitely a very big desire to fix this and to make it right. And I do think it's probably one of the biggest problems, Oscar. I remember somebody, criticizing a big oil company on LinkedIn one time when I was just reading something, and I didn't want to challenge anyone publicly, but to me, I'm sure that same person is driving a car and consuming the product. So the fundamental reality is these are very basic underlying issues. So we have to find solutions. They have to be filled with integrity. So to answer your question about what can we do, what we don't want to do is a bit of greenwashing and, do a charity donation or plant a few trees on a one-off. I think particularly younger people will see through that in a heartbeat. So they will know if you're just ticking the box. So you need to have it at the heart of your strategy if you expect to be respected. So I think that's the important starting point. And if you start from there, you will find a solution.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess it's about taking effective solutions and communicating them in an efficient manner that will reach these audiences.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
So, Paula, you interview many of these companies all around the world, as well as some of those that are more focused on the convenience part. Can you give us some examples of some things that you see that are interesting for the sector that some of these individual companies may do?
Yes, I suppose there's a couple of principles that I've over the years kind of decided or realized, I guess, are important principles for success in loyalty. And I've written about this extensively, and I'm sure you've seen some of it. But to me, it's a balance between something that's clear, something that's consistent, and something that's compelling. So I think all of those principles are extremely important when anyone is building a loyalty proposition, whether it's a formal loyalty program or purely a way of doing business, because there's lots of ways, obviously, to drive customer loyalty. One that I loved, for example, just perhaps unfamiliar with a lot of your viewers, I had a great interview with AA Smart Fuels down in New Zealand, and they just had an extraordinary simplicity of a proposition, which is Sense All Fuel, but funded by essentially a coalition of about 40 partners. And it was just a wonderful program in a relatively small country, but with 95% household penetration. So I think when you do have something that is clear and consistent, people get it. And it takes time to build a compelling proposition. But we've talked about lots of the other brands, but I thought New Zealand might not be a market that your viewers are familiar with, and I certainly wasn't. But I suppose the big high profile ones, I did have Seven Rewards on the show. As you said, 7-Eleven is an extraordinary success story. 55 million members, would you believe, of the Seven Rewards program. And that's incredibly compelling. And there's a lot of things underlying it, I think, Oscar. You know, they've really built that program to do absolutely everything that they can find that their customers or members might want to do. Even solutions, for example, like people, you know, sometimes still want to pay with cash. That's the reality in lots of different places. So 7-Eleven have literally built a proposition where you can essentially top up your wallet with cash and then have all of the benefits of contactless payment, but still have paid by cash. So I think that's a really nice understanding of fitting the customer's needs with a digital solution. So I love what 7-Eleven is doing. I love what Circle K is doing in terms of car wash we talked about. And yeah, I think Go Plus in the UK, as I said, is another one way up there on the radar because of the innovative thinking and again, moving to a different model to reward their loyal customers.
Yeah, I feel like right in today's current market, retailers are having like a three-legged approach to improve the loyalty for customers and the brand value. On the one hand, the trend that we've been seeing for the longest time has been the convenience offering, having a really good food, fresh food, and offering. So you're not only competing on fuel, but you're competing on something where maybe you've got more of a margin to have a differentiated offer. We see the Buckies of this world, right, in America, and they got really, really strong loyalty from the customers. We can see the sustainability aspect as well, like the Scandinavian companies, where they're making big efforts to, show society that they're the main business. And then we have the technological approach, right? You already mentioned, and we see this a lot in Asia, where from facial recognition to other methods that the customers may engage with and may feel like really comfortable or excited to go to those shops. Do you see any of these three having more relevance than others as we move forward?
It's absolutely location specific, Oscar. As you said, I'm sitting here in the Middle East. We haven't yet got any subscription propositions, for example, up and running. We do have plenty of great technology, but not in the way that China has with its super apps, for example. So I believe all of these things are ways to delight customers. I think we're all very well trained marketeers and we know about our 4Ps: product, price, promotion, and place. So it is a case of listening to your customers. So if there's one thing I have learned from talking to all of these wonderful experts, Oscar, it's there's no such thing as one size fits all. And that's something that I've been told by BP, by Circle K, by 7-Eleven. It's back to the customer obsession, but local customer obsession. Look at what they're saying to you in individual markets. And if it's a case where they want something super slick and technical, sometimes I do, for example, then absolutely build that. We all know the pandemic has accelerated digital adoption. So it's a wonderful opportunity and has proven to be extraordinary for lots of brands. But yeah, I think all of these things have to be prioritized and implemented depending on what your customers say that they want from you.
Mm. Yeah, and kind of going to something that you mentioned already is that there's no one size that fits all. What's when it comes to like a multi-country brand such as Shell or Circle K, Is it better to have a specific loyalty system for the domestic market and a different one to another, or do you see benefits in having like a wide range of multi-country strategy?
I would say you can often have the same underlying technology, but very rarely the same strategy in market. And you mentioned Shell. So Shell in China has a very different loyalty proposition to Shell UK. So what I find is very useful is to have a central point of expertise to be able to understand the parameters of what is a successful loyalty program. So when you look at the profitability, the P&L purely from a loyalty proposition, you need to be able to test and learn from each market. So again, the test and learn locally to find out what will work. Ideally, the same infrastructure, although that very rarely happens. But then absolutely, you just have that expertise. And I think I referenced that not everybody has gone out and looked for the right expertise. If you have it in-house, that's absolutely fantastic. But I suppose, find it not sufficiently well thought through if you're expecting a generally qualified marketeer like I was to be able to understand the nuances of running loyalty. So whether it's internal or external, I think you just need to have specific industry expertise around loyalty propositions. And then absolutely you can make sure it works globally.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more brands coming on with their loyalty programs now. I'm sure that you've been involved with some of them in the past. Before, it just used to be the big, really big brands, and so now, do you feel like it's a must for anyone, even if you're just a retailer with, let's say, 25 convenience stores?
I think a loyalty mindset is essential. It doesn't always have to be a structured loyalty program. So I think customers expect to be rewarded and recognized, and I certainly do. For example, my local gym is literally, two different locations, but they do have a stamp card program, and I like that card to be stamped. It's not clearly a very advanced solution, but at least I feel like they're making an effort. So even in B2B, for example, I often say, it's just down to the simplicity of maybe taking your customers to lunch. Again, it's not a structured loyalty program, but you're thinking about how can I make this person feel like I value their business. So yes, I think there's absolutely no one's too small and no one's too big to think about loyalty and implement something that's relevant for their business.
Okay, well, that's all from me, Paula. I think it's been really interesting for our listeners, all the station operators, all the suppliers that think to move into this space, which is just continuous growing and growing.
Mm.
And thank you very much for all your information, all your words. I encourage everyone to follow Paula. I'm sure there are many episodes that people can take a lot of knowledge from.
Thank you, Oscar.